Welcome to In the Spotlight. I'm Abigail Pogrebin. Avram Mlotek is a rabbi, a cantor, a Yiddish actor and singer. He's a writer, a licensed social worker, and a grandchild of Holocaust refugees and Yiddish cultural leaders. He is the author of Why Jews Do That, or 30 Questions Your Rabbi Never Answered, and Passover in a Pandemic. He's a co-founder of BASE, and Mlotek served as spiritual director for the BASE movement at large and as the inaugural BASE rabbi for Manhattan for 7 years. Avram has been named by the Forward as one of America's most inspiring rabbis and listed as a leading innovator in Jewish life today by the New York Jewish Week's 36 under 36. Are you under 36 anymore?
I just hit 36.
Oh my gosh, you still qualify.
Double high.
Double high. I'm not sure you qualify. It says under.
Yeah, I know. That was a while ago.
But you're entitled to grow older. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Good to have you. I feel like we have 15,000 people in common, but it's a small Jewish world.
It's such a privilege to be here.
Thank you. And we had your dad on the podcast. This is a broadcast.
Sure.
Not to make you start with your patrilineal descent, but because many people know him as a giant of Yiddish music and the canon. Zalman Mlotek. Can you just talk about what your household was like growing up? Was it just Yiddish songs at the breakfast table? Were you all singing and dancing all the time?
My home was full of music from every waking moment. Shabbos, our Shabbos table was a real gift because I have two younger siblings, and my folks and I, we all just would erupt in harmony and song.
Um dem Feier, wir singen Lieder, die Nacht ist heier, wir werden nicht müde, und soll der Feier verloschen werden, scheint auf der Himmel mit seinen Sternen, bekreunt die Kerl mit Blumenkranzen, um dem Feier mir freilich tanzen, a Tanz und Lied ist unser Leben, denn auch in Schlaf allein wir schweben.
And it was nigunim, wordless tunes, and Yiddish melodies.
From the crib, practically.
Yeah, I teased my father that I learned Yiddish Holocaust songs before I knew English nursery rhymes, because I grew up performing with him from a very young
Tell the audience
age.
what he does for those who might know, not the 5 people who don't know.
Sure. My father is the artistic director of the National Yiddish Theater, Volksbühne, which is, I believe, the longest continuous running Yiddish theater in the world. But he's a conductor and a musician.
And he also created the Yiddish Fiddler,
yes,
or recreated.
Yes, the creator. That's where Yiddish Fiddler was first presented at the Volksbühne. It was the Volksbühne that presented it, but it was his parents, actually, my grandparents, who were these Yiddish cultural activists, and we were always aware of that somehow.
What does that mean to be a cultural activist?
It was to I tease my parents a lot, but that I grew up confused adux, and that was thanks to their own religious affiliation. My mom came from a modern Orthodox background, my father from a secular and cultural home. Both children of Holocaust survivors and refugees, but radically different ways of expressing their Yiddishkeit and their Judaism. And my father's father was a survivor and a Yiddish poet, and the editor of the Yiddish Forward. And my grandmother was an ethnomusicologist who worked as the music archivist at the YIVO for 50+ years. And together they compiled an anthology, several anthologies actually, of Yiddish songs. And we grew up with those songs and singing those songs and knowing those songs and hearing Yiddish singers sing those songs and Broadway singers learn those songs. So I guess Yiddish, a cultural activist is someone who's aware that there's more than the dat and din, the religion and judgment, or the law and the customs of the people. It's rather expansive.
And in growing up in this family, we usually, it's a cliche to say there's always a moment of rebellion or resistance. Was there a moment where you're like, enough with the Yiddish kind of?
When I started out at Sarah Lawrence to study theater and creative writing, and I did some twists and turns studying Islamic scriptures and cantorial music before I transferred to Brandeis, and that's sort of where I entered into my own spirituality and religiosity, and I'll always remember having this conversation with my grandmother, who passed away several years ago. She was the smartest person I knew. She could recite Shakespeare's plays in alphabetical order. Wow. And had a real encyclopedic memory, but was not familiar with the rabbinic body of literature at all. And when I told her I wanted to be a rabbi, to her she said, "But you're an ethical person. How could you do such a thing?" And it was such a wonderful exploration with her as I entered into yeshiva and broke my teeth over Tosfot and Aramaic texts to show her that this, to introduce this body of literature to her humbly, as she had, of course, introduced me to so much. So in some ways, I imagine my religiosity felt like a bit of a
rebellion. That's some rebellion. And you went where for seminary? YCT, am I right?
I went to YCT,
which is Chovevei Torah.
Yes.
And Dov Linzer is a friend.
Yes.
Can you talk about why you chose it and what that institution was for you?
I chose YCT because I believed and still believe in the vision of love that I heard Rabbi Avi Weiss, preach and teach and live about. And I think every denomination...
We should be clear that Avi Weiss is the incredible and legendary creator of YCT and also at Hebrew Institute of Riverdale.
Yes, as well as the creator of Yeshivat Maharat, which is a seminary that ordains women to be Orthodox clergy.
We've had those folks on this broadcast.
That's I think it was Rav Yitz Greenberg who said, "I don't care what movement you belong to, so long as you're somewhat ashamed, a little bit embarrassed of it." And I felt like open orthodoxy was the closest of where my heart was. What I was saying before, that I think every movement strives to be connected to its roots and traditions, and also open to the world. And besides Rav Avi, I had also met phenomenal young rabbis who had come out of that school.
And you you used the word love there,
yes,
which can sometimes sound a little flimsy, and we don't know exactly what is meant by it. So I
yes,
kind of want you to drill down on love as an approach in a rabbinical seminary.
Well, to be honest, I think that seminary and all seminaries could use a little bit more love, and I'm going to try to articulate what I mean by that. It's a type of radical inclusivity. Sometimes we call it Hachnasat Orchim, right, or Gmilut Chasadim. But that isn't an afterthought. That isn't part of some type of political agenda. But it's a genuine part of spiritual living. It's like an honest part of what it is to be a Jew. The Talmud tells us that before the rabbis would begin their morning prayers, they would go out to engage in acts of tzedakah, to give a charity. That wasn't like a feel-good, service. That was a prerequisite for engaging within their own spirituality.
Before prayer.
Before prayer. So that the engagement with the other, whoever the other might be, was actually the most central part of Jewish life. That the most often repeated charge in the Torah has nothing to do with kashrut or Shabbat or any other types of ritual element, but is to love and not to oppress the ger, the Hebrew for stranger, immigrant, other. So when I talk about love, that's the love that I think is the bedrock of our tradition. So
when you graduated or you got smicha,
yes,
what was your kind of next step? Did you have a plan?
I had worked at HIR as a rabbinical intern, and also at colleges, and worked in nursing homes, and but had a dream that I had typed up on a Google Doc in my laptop in the Beit Midrash, which was to empower pluralistic rabbinic couples, meaning a rabbi and a rabbi's partner. And they could be queer, straight, conservative, reform, of various denominational affiliations, but who were living authentic Jewish lives. And to open their homes to young Jews, particularly those in the 20s and 30s bracket, who I think the institutional world is rather concerned about, and their affiliation with institutional life, but Dafka targeting specifically, engaging that population of folks who aren't rushing to join synagogue, but are still seeking community and learning, but on their own terms. And thanks to many shepherds and stewards and supporters, that idea came into fruition.
And that was base.
And that was base.
And why'd you call it base? It was like a home base?
We called it base for a bunch of different reasons. Base as in, a home base, a grounding point, a spiritual center, and also a nod to the Hebrew Yiddish, as in base or Beit Midrash, a house, a home of learning and inquiry, Beit Mikdash, even a holy home, Beit Knesset, a home of gathering, but to be that center, that grounding point for folks.
So was Hillel involved right away?
We pitched it. First to. First, we had pitched this to Birthright Next of blessed memory, and
what year was this pitching happening?
It was before we graduated. It was still in its
and who's we?
Infancy. It was myself and my partner Yael Kornfeld, and my chavruta, my study partner John Leaner, and his partner Faith Leaner, and. As the stars would have it, Faith was working at the Bronfman Center at the time with Dan Smokler, who was Hillel's chief innovation officer, and who Yael and I knew from the Upper West Side Minyan scene. And Dan helped shepherd Base through Hillel. Hillel was Base's first fiscal sponsor, mostly thanks to UJ Federation of New York, and we've since migrated homes. Base has since migrated homes to Moshe House, which works with young Jewish adults all across the world.
But it really has worked. I mean, it's kind of incredible to hear just how formative it has been for so many people. It's got to feel amazing.
I believe that in general that things from the heart, as the sages would say, they come towards the heart. And Base wasn't cooked up in a boardroom, disconnected from the people that we seek to serve. It was for ourselves and for our peers. It was cooked up in our living room. I remember where Faith and John, when we sat down in our living room on the Upper West Side talking about this dream project. And it's tremendously humbling to see it continue to grow and evolve. And now, we all as founders have stepped back from Base, and it continues to grow into new cities. And it's very humbling to see. I think if we do our job, if Base does its job well, it will hopefully it won't need to exist.
Mm. And Honeymoon Israel, talk about your involvement there. Honeymoon
Israel is a wonderful organization that I was privileged to staff. I think it was Rabbi Shira Koch Epstein who first recommended me to them, as they were looking for they were about to staff to mount their first New York City trip, and were in search of a rabbi.
I just want to say she is a great rabbi, also, and a friend, and runs something now that was the Rabbinic Center, the Center for Rabbinic Innovation, now called ATRA.
Yes. She and Honeymoon Israel is really an Or Chadash, I think, a new light in the Jewish world. They bring 20 couples who are in committed relationships to Israel for a highly subsidized but highly immersive 10-day trip. And the real, I think, chiddush of it, the special aspect of it is that, besides having an incredibly dynamic and powerhouse tour guide, they invite a local spiritual leader or rabbi, a community educator from the couple's hometown. Mm-hmm. So I had the privilege of being the first New York City rabbi for that trip, and I've gone back for subsequent trips and have helped mentor some of the younger rabbis who are now going on trips. But they've really blown up in terms of their success in cities all over the world,
so
the country.
Just as before we turn to you as a performer,
okay,
you're part of kind of an incubation of, I think that's answering a need that maybe when I was growing up either wasn't as evident or wasn't being answered. How do you see the landscape right now? I know it's a big question, but in terms of maybe, like, what's the next thing if you were going to be that innovator, that entrepreneur that said, I really feel like this is what we're lacking still?
Abby, I really feel like Base was so sick. I know people call it innovative and successful, but I think it was able to be that because it was true to its core, in that, you know, the precepts were pretty ancient. Base was founded on radical hospitality, hachnasat orchim, gemilut chasadim, on Talmud Torah, on learning, you know, on the Jewish calendar, of Shabbat, and so I think it was, I think, at least part of Base's success, and I think for the Jewish world at large, being able to own our own tradition in ways that speak honestly to us, whoever the us is I think so important.
And in terms of what you think is next?
What I think is next? I don't know.
What is needed next?
What is needed next, I think, is more achdut, more unity among the discord and political disarray and even religious opposition. I think
it's hard to talk to each other.
It's so hard to talk to each other. It's hard to daven together, hard for people to pray together, or people to sing together. But you know, I think I'm actually not as concerned about, you know, the millennial engagement in ways that I know a lot of my teachers and folks in that world were, because I saw people who were thirsty for learning and for connection, but it was on their own terms. It was questions that weren't necessarily being asked. So I think, you know, being attuned to the soul, as you know, as loose as that sounds, I think is what's most important.
You have written, I see a rabbi's work as a translator in many ways, and you quote the Piasetzner rabbi? Piasetzner rabbi, who said it was the educator's role to speak in the language of one's students. Mm-hmm. How is that kind of orienting you?
That's my frame. When I discovered Hasidus, our mystical tradition in yeshiva and rabbinical school, my heart found a home. Of connecting with my ancestors who said, you know what, yeah, there's other ways of connecting to this faith tradition and to the divine outside of the shakla v'tarya, the back and forth of the Gemara, or the most strict religious adherence, but maybe through song or through dance or through meditation or through engagement in nature. And so teachers like the Piasetzner Rebbe, who's actually the last Hasidic Rebbe in the Warsaw Ghetto, those teachers continue to speak to my, at least to my soul. I think that is a rabbi's work. A rabbi literally means teacher. So we're, I think, only as successful as we're able to be understood and comprehended. So that's why I think it's so important to speak in the language of our students. And
the language of music. Let's get to that, because it's obviously run through your childhood and your family. But now in your professional life, it feels like is it more kind of a focus now?
It certainly is. I mean, I strive to infuse music and songful, heartfelt tunes in my tefillah and my prayers when I serve as a shaliach tzibur, as a prayer leader. But I'm working right now on a project with my father. It's a musical called Amid Falling Walls, or Zwischenfallendik event, which I'll explain in a moment, but that actually features the Yiddish music that was written and in some cases performed in the ghettos and concentration camps and labor camps during World War II. And this is music that I grew up singing, my father grew up singing, his parents compiled, and you know, and helped bring to the world.
And when you say you're collaborating, how's that working?
Like the process?
Well, the process and the relationship.
It's a fascinating one. You know, I've worked with my father on concerts and lectures, but this is my first foray into the theatrical world. And my father is a fierce perfectionist, and you know, what I appreciate so much about working with him, and it reminds me of what I strive to in my own rabbinic work is the why behind the what that we're doing and who we are trying to share this material with. You know, the title of Amid Falling Walls comes from a song that was written by a Yiddish poet and a partisan named Glick, who was 22 years old when he was murdered, and the song came to be the rallying anthem of the underground, of the Jewish underground. You know, never say that this is your final road, that a people stood amid crumbling walls with rifles held in hand. It's not a song of free birds flying overhead, written with blood and not with lead. You know, this is... Can you give one, you don't have to sing it, but can you say one line? All of that text actually comes from Glick's poem, Sag nit keinmal as du gehst den letzten Weg. Never say that you are going on your final path. And this material speaks so much to me, besides finding the music. You asked about the music being so captivating and enriching, but its message and the context in which it was birthed into the world is so profound. The idea of such spiritual resistance amid, you know, such like unfathomable tyranny, and that is, I think, the power of song too. You know, yeah. So you know that's where my current focus is right now.
And you did a concert with your father 2 years ago, right? The Songs of Spiritual Resistance.
Yeah, for the JCC in Manhattan.
Yeah, I just want to play a little bit of that so people have a taste of it.
Es wird die Morgensonne begilden uns dem Heind und der Nächten wird verschwinden mit dem Feind. Nur euch versammeln wird die Sonne in dem Kajol, wie a Parol soll gehen das Lied von dort zu dort. Geschrieben ist das Lied mit Blut und nicht mit Blei. Es ist nicht kein Lied von einer Vogel heute frei. Das hat der Volk zwischen fallende gewöhnt, das Lied gesungen mit Nagaris in die Hand. Das hat der Volk zwischen fallende gewöhnt, das Lied gesungen mit Nagaris in die Hand. Das sagt nicht keinmal, als du gehst dem letzten Weg. Gott schimmeln bleien, verstellen bläue Tag. Kommen wenn noch unser ausgebänkte Schau, es wird abheugt und unser Trott mit seinen da. Kommen wenn noch unser ausgebänkte Schau, es wird abheugt und unser Trott mit seinen da.
So I don't want you to skirt the what's it like to work with your dad. In addition to him being a perfectionist,
yes.
When I interviewed him here at this table, he was talking about the auditions for the Yiddish Fiddler,
yes.
And just how clear it was whether someone was going to be able to handle the Yiddish or not.
Yes.
And I can't remember the phrase that they used as a test, but it was pretty brutal, like to separate either men from the boys as sexist, but the wheat from the chaff. You grew up with this perfectionist, and I mean, do you find you have the same kind of exacting standards?
You know, I think I have I think behind his exacting standards is this like quest for authenticity or honesty, and I think I have that. I might not have it manifest in the same ways that he does. He's I think a world-class musician and conductor and. But yes, that search for truth, almost, of living like a spiritual truth, I share deeply.
It also felt like this is something that without us, without you all, I mean, he's not saying this, but I'm saying it, it's gone. Or it's kind of muddied or watered down so that we don't actually know what it felt like and sounded like. And when I watched Stephen Skybell happen to give a concert somewhere at a conference, and just the passion of these songs,
Yes.
the ones that are lesser known, and how much grit is behind them, and how much pain, but also incredible joy, elation sometimes. And just if you're not getting it right musically,
Yes.
lyrically, it feels like you're not getting it right.
Yes. Well, it's in the same way that I think I went to yeshiva. I was thirsty for a certain type of, proficiency and maybe even fluency in the texts of our rabbinic sages, of not only for the classical response of dam ala hashiv, know what to respond to those who disbelieve, but for my own sake of wanting to learn and to know and to know truly. And I think my father has instilled that in many ways.
And just because I was trolling you on Facebook to
Yes.
prepare for this, and I think I saw your children singing Yiddish.
They do.
Beautifully. So is this the next generation?
They're not
Age
singing
turn?
Yiddish Holocaust songs, but they are singing.
They're not traumatized.
Not in that kind of way, I think we traumatize our children lovingly in all kinds of ways.
And there's time. There's plenty of time for trauma.
For sure. No, they sing. My daughter Ravi, who's 10 years old, will actually be singing a song at the theater's gala, and it's a song called Jugendhymn, the youth anthem, written by this man who I need to mention in relation to this play because he's such a central part of it. After World War II ended, this Vilna-based poet and partisan, Shmerka Kaczyginski was his name, instead of going off to rebuild his life, traveled to displaced persons camps all over Eastern Europe, collecting songs and poems that otherwise would have been lost. And it's in a Yiddish volume, and that text has been our sort of holy text that we return to over the course of it. But it's a song that he wrote, and the chorus of that song is, Val jung is jede wer es will nur. Young is whoever wills it. That it's an issue of the heart, and thankfully my kids love to sing, so it doesn't feel like twisting their arm too much.
And you've written a children's book, am I
I've
right?
written a children's book.
More than one?
Just one. It's a dark children's book. It's called Passover in a Pandemic. It's about a young girl who reconnects with her bubby, and she asks her bubby during the lockdown, during the pandemic over Zoom, if she's ever experienced a Passover in isolation. And her bubby happens to be a Warsaw Ghetto survivor, and tells her granddaughter, who's nearing bat mitzvah, about the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, which of course took place on Passover night. And so it's a story of transmission of trauma, but of family narrative and story.
Well, you haven't done enough. This is the problem. You don't have enough projects. You don't have enough a resume. I'm saying that lightly, but it does strike me just how many irons have been in the fire in this incredibly beautiful way. I want to quote you at the end. You say, creating art is a deeply Jewish act, like King David's Psalms or Bezalel of the Bible. Bezalel. When we meet God in Genesis, God is a creative artist, creating heaven and earth and everything in between. It's upon us to continue that sacred, serious, even silly creative process. Thank you for being on this broadcast.
Thank you.
And that is Avram Mlotek. Please look him up. You have a website.
I do.
People can find your body of work. I'm Abigail Pogrebin. This is In the Spotlight, and I will see you next time. Thank you.